Hello, my name is Matthew Waddington, and I work at the Legislative Drafting Office in Jersey. And I work on the computer readable legislation project there. And this talk is going to show some of the work that we've been doing recently. By the way, I will make these slides available. There are lots of links in them. So I am going to trot through some of them fairly fast on the basis that anybody interested can look at the slides afterwards. But I want to demonstrate some of the things that we've been doing. So, brief note about the computer readable legislation project. The idea is to help computers to follow through the logic that we're already writing into our drafts as legislative drafters. So there's more details there. And the idea behind it is that we think a lot of what we do in writing legislation is constructing effectively if-then propositions. If these facts are the case, then this legal effect applies. And that can be for things like definitions or must provisions or may provisions for most of our standard typical drafting. The project has several strands. The two that I'm going to talk about briefly today are the one on improving the rigor in our legislative drafting by looking at what we can learn from logicians and computer scientists about how legislation's logic is put together. And then also what we've done in looking at tools that a legislative drafter could perhaps use in the future to help the legislative drafter in their drafting and also to help their readers. So the non-technical materials, I won't spend any time on that. We are looking to put material out by June this year. There's some information there about work we've done on May. We've looked at must before, and I've talked at other conferences about must. There are some links there on how May works. But again, I'm not going to spend time on that. So we're more looking at today the drafting tools that we might have, things that would be the equivalent of what a computer programmer has, where the Word equivalent or XML editor equivalent is actually positively helping them not to make mistakes, and also helping them to visualize what they're doing. So my key question that's come up from what we've done so far recently is, why on earth are we not using the web for what it was made for decades ago, which is hyperlinks? So as legislative drafting officers across the Commonwealth, including in your region, we are publishing material. So if I just go to this is the Jersey Charities Law. Here is our web page for the Charities Law, Part 5, dealing with governors of registered charities. There's not a single link anywhere on this. Now, fair enough, there is one cross-reference, and some offices are more advanced than others about cross-references, but there's nothing else either. We started on looking at what we could do with hyperlinks. Cross-references are the obvious place that everyone starts, and the obvious place that a lot of people then crash on the rocks and give up, because particularly if you try to be over-ambitious and set it up so that you can have live cross-references while you're drafting, which is an extremely tall order. Jersey, we only have Word. Most offices in the Commonwealth only have Word. Some of the bigger offices, and obviously New Zealand and several in Australia, have XML editors. That should be something that makes life easier in terms of getting hyperlinks going, but it doesn't seem to have worked out that way very much. New Zealand has internal and external cross-references linked, which is an advance. But even there, when we look at this, there are links for other regulations inside the same instrument, and there are external links, but these links are to odd bookmarks. This one is called LMS 96420, which has obviously no bearing on the fact that the link is to regulation 67 of these regulations. This one to 62.1, again LMS 96404. So they're not capturing the structure of the legislation as drafters are familiar with it. Part of how to make that better is by using IDs, identities for every paragraph of the text. And this kicked off a couple of years ago in Valentine's Day. Hamish Fraser, who works in New Zealand, is a techie, wrote a love letter to the Parliamentary Council of the World. Very nice of him. His love letter actually was saying how much he appreciates our work, but also trying to make a suggestion about how to use unique IDs for each paragraph of text to improve and to open up possibilities. So he was looking at a system that would use something like this: P2, S10, S65, L1, A2. That, if I can show you what they did with it. So that's taking the same Social Security, but there it is, Social Security regulations, there it is, Regulation 65. If I move over it, you see that as I go to each provision, it's greyed out in a way that reflects the nested structure of our provisions. That 65 has some text, then there's A, then there's 1, and then there's 2, Roman 1, Roman 2. And also the ID for each of these is, as I say, in this systematic form. So it's S65, L1, A2. It's not necessarily how we would picture that, because we're not really necessarily that interested in the fact that it's in part 2 or subpart 10, particularly because the regulation numbering doesn't start again. What we've done in Jersey is Kate Hanna, known to many people in CALC from being secretary before, she has wrestled with our version of Word and our templates, and she's come up with a way to make IDs that work for us. So Article 18, paragraph 2, subparagraph A or B, in this case B, in that case, clause 3. The issue then is, why do we spend so much time complaining that other lawyers don't read our interpretation acts when we also seem to spend so much effort trying to hide the Interpretation Act? Fair enough. New South Wales is an example of an office that does mention the Interpretation Act, but only by going to the lengths of adding notes to their legislation in which they refer to the fact that these regulations are made under this Charitable Trusts Act. So here are some definitions. Well, there's only one, they're defining the Act, but they add a note to explain that the Act itself, Charitable Trusts Act, will have definitions which affect the interpretation and application of this regulation, reflecting the fact that in their interpretation act, they've got a rule that's fairly common in Commonwealth jurisdictions that a definition in parent legislation flows through into legislation, the child legislation made under it. And then they're also mentioning the Interpretation Act, and they've got a hyperlink to it. But we could do much more than that, it seems to us. So I will just demonstrate this toy that we've produced purely for illustrative purposes. So this is an imaginary piece of legislation, but we've set it up so that you can have a pop-up which has a link. It shows you the definition and it has a link to the provision that's got the definition. That's all well and good for definitions inside this same instrument, these same regulations. Then there's also things defined outside. So things defined outside include the definition liquor is defined in the Customs and Excise law that this imaginary piece is made under. Equally, person, one of the most fundamental things we've got as drafters, is defined in the interpretation law. It'll be defined in for most of you in your Interpretation Act as well. So that then gives a link. You click on that link and it takes you to the interpretation law. So once you've done that, you see there are quite a few terms that are defined either in these regulations or in the interpretation law. But you can toggle that on or off so that the reader isn't distracted by it when they don't want to be. I would encourage people to try that ILD out. When you start taking that further, you can end up identifying every word by its role, and that to me is very useful for the drafter in reminding you how much you're using that has been defined or is covered by the principle about the same word having the same meaning. What Kate Hannah has managed to do for us in Jersey is use the bookmark system in Word to allow us in our actual drafts to have these pop-ups in Word. So as I move the mouse over there, it says in this file, registered public benefit statement has the meaning given by. So, and I can click. So that takes me to a definition that's internal. If I move down, there's person. In the interpretation law, in person shall include a body. So it takes you to the interpretation law provision as well. And the point about that is we're then able to reflect that automatically. That will feed through once this is actually in operation, that will feed through to our let me just move that slightly. It'll feed through to the versions we put on our website. So those will have the ordinary cross references plus these pop-ups. and the pop-ups will be able to take you either to the definition in the actual provision, or with something like amend there, it'll take you, no, should take you to the interpretation law. Sorry about that. But that link is to the interpretation law. So the idea would be that you are making legislation far easier for your readers. Most of them don't know about the Interpretation Act. Most of them equally will end up being in Regulation 6. They won't think to look back to Regulation 1 and work out how many of those words are defined there, how many are defined in the Interpretation Act. So we're at the moment, because of a paper-based system, we're letting people thrash about in the dark, which doesn't seem very fair. We've also managed to get it into the PDF versions that are automatically produced on our site, but currently there are no pop-ups, just links for that. So there's much more we could do with these, but a lot of this is very similar to what we've done in using Excel. But now we're working with a team in Singapore Management University using their L4 language to produce versions of the legislative text, which can then be visualized. So the point here is this shows the British Nationality Act, born in the UK after commencement or born in a qualifying territory after the appointed day, and father or mother is a British citizen or settled in the UK, or in this case, father or mother is British citizen settled in the UK or settled in the qualifying territory. I'll just show you very quickly an example of that. We could redraft the way that the was written in the original, but so we could make it clearer that there were these different alternatives, and then we can move the visualization around. The idea of the project is that eventually changing the visualization will change the code underneath it. At the moment, it's only changes to the code that change the visualization. So just looking at that redraft, that's a way that we've carved it up again differently, and then that's how that reflects in the visualization. I hope that that is useful to people in showing the sorts of things that we're up to. Sorry I couldn't be in Perth. I hope there might be some questions. Thank you.